you so much for being here. I'm so glad it's a full room. I thought that nobody was going to show up. For like a Central American person, it's getting really cold outside. Probably not for you. But anyhow, thanks for being here. So I've been told I have 30 minutes for this talk, and I hope I wasn't overly ambitious because I try to put a lot of stuff in there. Nice photos for you guys. Hopefully you'll enjoy the presentation. I'm just gonna take 1 minute or two to introduce the place that I worked on. This is our campus in Costa Rica. So as Leslie mentioned, that really long name, the Tropical Agricultural Research and Higher Education Center is located in Costa Rica. And we basically are a research center that is focused on research, education, and outreach. So I'm not gonna say a lot more than that. I'm just gonna jump into the presentation. Okay, so you're probably familiar with this image. This is the big marble. The first time that it was taken, this photo was back in 1972. And, you know, it supported all these ecological movements and that realization that we are together in this planet. You probably note also that closely to 38% of Earth's ice-free land surface, roughly, I would say that today that still stands, although this is from a publication in 2011, is dedicated to food production. That means crops and pasture lands. And that also creates many different things happening with the land compression of these natural habitats. The first one is that these major changes produced by this necessity of providing food for all of these people in the planet has changed the way that we have approached the biodiversity crisis. If I want to focus mainly in two aspects, I would say the first one is that we're more focusing outside the forest and the natural protected areas and looking into the agricultural matrix to see how we can make this matrix more sustainable and actually contribute to biodiversity conservation since we need it. And the second one is the evolution of this concept that tell us that we rely on biodiversity and natural resources for subsistence, so for human subsistence, and that or dependence on natural ecosystem or natural systems. And that's what we also call ecosystem services, or in the last couple of years, nature's contributions to people. So keep that in mind, that these are basically the few things that I want to be talking during this talk today. Mainly, I want to focus on three things, and I'm going to use four examples to talk about these three things. The first one is that Mesoamerican agricultural landscapes can contribute to biodiversity conservation, and that investing in biodiversity conservation also creates a win-win situation, since biodiversity also benefits crop productivity. So we want more biodiversity that is benefiting by the generation of the system services, including food productivity increases. And also the third one is that it is necessary, it is important, it is critical that we engage and we collaborate with local partners, local researchers, and local governments also to think about long-term conservation of this biodiversity in these tropical agricultural landscapes. Many times as researchers, we go into places and we collect data, and then we don't stay in those landscapes, in those places. So we need to engage with local people to make sure that whatever we learn will stay there and will be used to further promote conservation and sustainable development. So example number one. We're going to start in Costa Rica, which is located in Central America. In this map, you can see the green dark color corresponds to forest, and the light green corresponds to pastures and crops. The color reddish is coffee, which is separated because I will talk a little bit more about coffee in one of the examples. So basically, Costa Rica is about 5 million hectares, and about 50% of that land is dedicated to agriculture, whether it's that crops or livestock production. I'm going to be focusing specifically in a region that is called the Volcánica Central Talamanca Biological Corridor, and that is that circle, the blue circle that appears in this map. And biological corridors in Costa Rica are biodiversity conservation initiatives that the main goal is to either conserve or restore connectivity in these landscapes. So these are big areas that include crops, agriculture, that try to connect natural protected areas, but they're not pristine at all. There's a mixture of different things. There's a matrix within these platforms that we call them. There's platforms. And in this particular landscape, we still have over 50% of forests, and the remaining is covered in agriculture. The map, what is showing is in dark green, the natural protected area systems in Costa Rica, and in light green, the biological corridors. So you can see how the biological corridors, the intention is to connect those natural protected areas, but recognizing that humans are present in these territories and they are a driving force in the sense of how do we conserve biodiversity by not necessarily establishing new protected areas. So following on this example, we worked on the CATIE farm or the CATIE campus actually for close to 11 years. Using mist netting, which is a method in which we capture birds and we measure different things. And we focus on 8 different land uses that are representative of what we see within the greater landscape of the Volcánica Central Talamanca biological corridor. Those land uses, if you go in alphabetical order from A to E to H, are forest fragments, multistrata coffee agroforest, multistrata cacao, cocoa agroforest, tea plantation, mixed species plantation, simplified coffee agroforest, pastures with live fences, and sugarcane. Now, you don't have to remember all these names. I know it's a lot of information. All you have to remember is that here I'm talking about agroforestry systems. So for those of you that do not know what an agroforestry system is, we're basically talking about the combination of either crops or livestock production with trees. So trees is an important component in agroforestry systems. And probably the most common one is coffee production, which is what we're seeing in this slide. On the middle photo is an agroforestry system or a shaded coffee plantation. And on the right is a sun coffee. So structurally, they're very different. The one with the trees and the shrubs is way more complex than when you move to sun coffee, which is only the coffee plants. So when we keep thinking about agroforestry systems, just keep in mind that it means that trees are involved, whether those are crops or animals. And also when we think at the landscape level, some of the agroforestry systems that are important in bringing some of that connectivity are live fences, for instance, dispersed trees in pasture lands in combination with other elements that are present within these landscapes. Going back to our example with the mist netting and the 8 different land uses, and don't worry about this graph, I just have like a quick take-home message. I just wanted to know that we invested a lot of time collecting different kind of information, and the main messages that we have here is, one, that the community of the birds is very distinct when we compare the different land uses. So especially forests still harbors or still has a very unique community that it's not present in the other land uses. So we need forests because that's where the unique species are still present within these agricultural landscapes. The second main message is that agroforestry systems such as coffee agroforestry or cacao agroforestry are very similar in the composition of the bird community to forests. So what can we learn here is that if we promote agroforestry systems in these agricultural landscapes, we're kind of helping conservation of this biodiversity. In this case, we're focusing with birds, but we see similar trends with other taxonomic groups. So having trees on crops or with animal, with livestock helps a lot to conserve habitat and create habitat for diverse communities. The other thing that I want to mention about this effort, because it was very long, we invested over 10 years collecting information, is that since we did that via mist netting, we were able to collect additional information about different characteristics of the birds. For instance, what we call traits, ecological traits or functional traits. And we were able also to contribute to global efforts, such as the publication 2 years ago in 2021 of the AboNet dataset, which is an open access dataset that includes morphological, ecological data for all birds of the world. So if you're interested in working with bird communities and are worried that you won't be able to collect specific characteristics of those individuals because you're not going to capture them, now this is available for you to ask different questions. And that is one of the reasons why I mentioned it, and because we use this to fit in the example number 2. So for example number 2, we're going to move to Honduras. Honduras also in Central America. And we're looking here in this landscape is in the Catacamas landscape. What you see in yellow is pasture and crops. So in this landscape, it's very obvious that is dominated by agriculture, mainly pastures. We also still have some forests in there, but obviously it's the main land use is pasture. And as you can imagine, it's very extensive. It's not specifically agroforestry systems. So we're talking about more like a monoculture, like pasture lands that are open, very extensive. What we did in this effort on the grid that you're actually seeing on top of the map is that we selected a couple of those quadrants and work on 5 different land uses: the shade coffee plantations, forest fragments, pastures with dispersed trees, and crops. And we asked several questions about the bird community. Again, bear with me, I'm an ornithologist, so I'll talk a lot about birds here. What we use here is that we use a different method, which is point count. And we also utilize the information from the AboNet data set. And you don't have to read all these awful, horrible slides. There's only a couple of things that I want to say. One is that it's a lot of data analysis behind what we collect in the field. But the main message is that because we already have available information that is open access, we can ask questions beyond just richness and abundance of species. And we can also focus on having functional diversity indices and having information about tree community weight and means. What you also learn from this effort is that information coming from mean tree height and mean diameter or breast height are important variables that are giving us important information about the bird community that is present in this Catacamas landscape. So the first one is open access data we can use to further ask more complex questions than just staying with richness and abundance, which is the typical taxonomic diversity. That agroforestry systems in the pasture-dominated landscape in Honduras, in Catacamas, is also contributing to bird conservation. We did this work also in collaboration with the General Biodiversity Direction of the Honduras government, and that's the collaboration aspect of this presentation. All of these data, all of these new experiences and learnings that we created through this project, it's being used now to inform a national strategy, which is the development of the NAMA livestock. So NAMA basically stands for Nationally Appropriate Mitigation Actions for the Honduras livestock sector. So the Honduras government is starting in 2023. Actually, the launch of the project was just last month, a new 5-6 year initiative that is trying to transform their livestock system. And they want to know how to promote agroforestry systems or silvopasture to make it better for biodiversity conservation and sustainable development. So this is the combination of the type of work that we usually do, working with local partners, local with governments, also informing policy and informing national strategies. Now, the third example has to do precisely with this collaboration with governments and local partners. And we'll go to Mexico. Now, you all know already what agroforestry systems are. And what we're looking at this slide is just a gradient of intensification. If we move from right to left, whether we call it primary forest or mature forest, which might be more appropriate, and we move to the left to the open pasture lands, we're moving in the intensification gradient. So we're going from a very complex habitat, which is the natural forest, into a monoculture with the open pasture lands, just herbaceous vegetation mostly. So what we wanted to know here with this work in Mexico, we work in 3 different states, in Jalisco, Chiapas y Campeche, which are the one highlighted in color in the Mexican map. And we worked with a project that was called Biopasos, which stands for Biodiversity and Sustainable Agroforestry Landscapes. And we basically wanted to inform the Environment and Agriculture Secretariats about the importance of agroforestry systems for something else that now it's carbon stocks. So they can use this information to also make sure that they achieve their goals for sustainable development and their national commitments and state level commitments. So basically, what we found is that we analyzed all of these land uses that I showed before: pasture lands, border banks, live fences, dispersed trees, secondary forests, and primary forests or mature forests. And we were able to find that dispersed trees and live fences store 26.7% more carbon than open pastures. So in comparison, having these other type of structures within the landscape also contributes to carbon stocks and carbon sequestration. The also thing that we'll learn is that agroforestry systems in general are contributing to carbon sequestration. So they're not replacing the forest. That's an important message, because the forest, the primary forest, store 123% more than open pasture lands. But you can have a combination of all of these land uses and creating a strategy to promote the one thing that you want to promote, which in this case would be a twofold, right? It's carbon sequestration, but it's also biodiversity conservation, because we already know that agroforestry systems are important for biodiversity conservation. It's another way to get around the main goal of focusing on conservation. The other thing that we were able to do with this project is that since we were working in collaboration with the Environment and Agriculture Secretariats, we used these results and results from many other research themes that I'm not going to present here, but we were able to do with them and as co-authors documents that are guidelines for the promotion of sustainable livestock production. This is the step next to a project finalizing in the territory and having this information delivered to the authorities to incorporate in their policies and see what's next after the project is done. How are we going to keep continuing promoting what we know already is good for conservation? And that's our effort in that respect. This takes me to example number 4 and the final example. And I want to take a few minutes here to go back to this map that you already saw about the biological corridors in Costa Rica and about the main goal of these biological corridors, or either maintaining or restoring connectivity for biodiversity conservation. And this work I'm going to be presenting now, it was done in collaboration with the Gun Institute, with Dr. Ricketts, which I saw somewhere here, and Natalia Vistizela, which I also saw somewhere in there. So what we did here is that during 2018 or 2019, I think, we drove around this landscape, which is the map you're looking here, which is the Volcánica Central Biological Corridor. And we identified 30 different coffee farms. And we decided that in each one of these 30 coffee farms, we're going to set up an exposure experiment. And when I talk about exposure experiment, I'll explain later with photos, but basically keep in mind that what we wanted to do was to create 4 different treatments to assess the importance of birds and bees in the delivery of ecosystem services. Birds, pest control, controlling the coffee bird odor, which one of the most damaging pests that attacks coffee production worldwide, and bees because of the pollination contribution. So we created this experiment in which we selected 8 plants in each one of the farms. In 4 of them, we constructed like a small house, like you see right here. And we covered those 4 plants and excluded birds under the idea that if birds are really important for pest control, if we keep them out, they will have more pests under the exposure, right? And the same thing we did with bees. If bees are really important for having more fruits because of pollination, then excluding the bees will mean that we'll have less fruits in those branches, right? So we did that in those 30 farms with these 8 plants, and we end up with 4 different treatments. One in which we have birds and bees present, so business as usual. We have birds foraging on top of the coffee plants and providing pest control services. And we have bees visiting flowers and providing pollination services. Then we have a second treatment in which bees are excluded where birds are present. A third treatment in which birds are excluded or bees are present. And a fourth one, which is a really awful one if we think about it, is that we don't have them. We don't have the birds and bees. So what happens to coffee productivity if we don't have these two groups in terms of how everything changes? So these are just photographs of the construction of the exposures and how we set up the exposures also for the pollination experiments. And now I want to show you a couple key results. I'm not going to go in a lot of detail on the methods. If you want to know more about the methods of the different examples that I presented so far, I'll be here after the presentation until November 30th, so we can talk later as well. So basically, I want to point out to two of the main results. The first one, if you go to the square in red, is that looking at fruit set proportion, which is basically fruit set is how many of the flowers produced by the plant actually became fruits. Remember that a coffee farmer is very interested in happy coffee berries because of what they're gonna sell to get the coffee beans and then bring another cup of coffee, right? So basically what we found is a positive interaction between birds and bees. That means that it's always better to have both of them present, birds providing pest control services and bees providing pollination services, because that allows us to have the greater proportion of fruit set in the different experiments that we set up and analyze. The second message that we learned, or the second result, is that looking at average fruit weight, we found the same relationship, a positive interaction, which is also called a synergy. So meaning both of them together are better than separated. So it's always better to have them because that will increase also the average fruit weight in grams provided in this graph. And that's what the red circle is showing in both of these two initial graphs. We also learned with this work that we were able to identify at least 41 different species of native bees that visited coffee flowers. And we're sure they're not the only one because later we did another work in more farms across the country, and we were able to identify even more species visiting coffee flowers. So there is an important opportunity here for a win-win situation in which having coffee under certain conditions or certain management will allow having healthy bee communities and bird communities, and then also providing ecosystem services that will provide farmers with increased productivity, so more economic revenue, which is the other part of the equation that I'm not going to show in detail, but we were able to translate this in money terms. How much would they win when birds and bees are present, but also how much will they lose if they're absent? The other thing that we learned, just another photo of a Melipona costarricense, where you can see it's carrying pollen, the pollen sacs, and they were very eagerly visiting coffee flowers. The other thing that we did with this project was engaging with a lot of local actors and a lot of local NGOs to transfer this new knowledge and transfer this information, whether that was through environmental education material or through workshops. We work closely with an organization that's called Bean Voyage that works particularly with women in Central America that are heads of family and that are coffee farmers as well. So they are very interested in knowing about this, knowing about better agricultural practices to increase biodiversity conservation in their coffee systems and how to get the benefits associated to the presence of this biodiversity. Some of these photos show examples of the team that we work in many of the examples that I presented, but also show a couple of the environmental educational materials, which we took to each one of those 30 farms and gave back the information to farmers so they could learn what we found in their particular farms in terms of the composition of the bee community and the bird community, and also what that means in terms of how to improve management. Now, I know we talk a lot about how agroforestry systems are important for biodiversity conservation. But one key aspects that I did not touch on this presentation is that it also depends on management of these agroforestry systems. So there's still a lot of information that is missing in terms of what's better, what's good, what's the equilibrium between having a good productivity and having good management to have conservation of biodiversity. And those are some of the questions that are we're still exploring with different partners, including the CATIE Institute. I want to take a moment also to thank many different organizations that have supported our work throughout these years. Just the first example that I presented, which included 10 years of collecting data that misnetting, was a lot of time out there collecting information. I only presented like a piece of the iceberg of all the learnings and results that we have, but we have to give thanks to many different organizations and people. And to start wrapping up, I'm gonna go back to the one of the first slides that are presented. I'm gonna call them now take-home messages based on the examples that I presented. The first one is that, as I mentioned before, there is evidence, and not just what I presented here. There's plenty of other people doing work in agricultural landscapes in Mesoamerica, and that evidence shows that it's possible to think about biodiversity conservation in agricultural landscapes, but it also is very dependent on how we manage these agricultural landscapes, how we manage these agroforestry systems. Not all agroforestry systems are the same, so we need to understand also the different things that come into play to actually have the result that we want. That investing in biodiversity conservation can create these win-win situations, because biodiversity also provides ecosystem services that benefit human populations. And if we focus about crop productivity, that's one of the things that I think, and I blame myself also as an ecologist, we usually miss the mark and we don't go into quantifying the economic benefits of many of the things that in ecology we know and understand. So we miss the piece of how to translate the importance of in economical terms to farmers that are trying to make decisions on a daily basis to survive. So we cannot go there with just the message that biodiversity conservation is important, but we need to show that there's also a win-win situation, so that we all come together and work in the same direction. And the third one, again, and I'm not emphasizing this enough, and for you that are probably future researchers or future people, academics doing research in other countries that are not the US or even within the US, it is really important that you engage with local partners, with local organizations, and recognize that there is knowledge in these places that you can learn from, and then you can use to ask more complex questions, and also how to give back. Many times we're consumed with our research questions and we don't think, how is what I'm doing going to benefit the community that I'm working on? So that's also another important question that we should ask ourselves. And this, asking those questions and having these conversations with people, we make sure that whatever we find, if we give back to the communities and the people in charge of making decisions, will secure the conservation of natural resources in those communities, because we eventually end up leading most of the time. So with that, I'll thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be happy to take questions.